Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news coming out of the transfer portal for the LSU Tiger fans as former Wisconsin defensive lineman Gio Paez commits to LSU heading into the 2024 season. And not only do I think Gio Paez is a damn solid football player for Wisconsin, as a Michigan fan, he always seemed to play some very solid football on the inside for Wisconsin. But more importantly, this answers probably the biggest question we had for this LSU team heading into that 2024 season was the depth of the inside of that defensive line. And what better way to fill it than a guy that is going into his 6th year of college football, who's played a ton of snaps at the Big Ten level. This was, in my mind, a really nice job of Brian Kelly identifying what questions that he has about this program from a roster standpoint and then addressing it in the transfer portal. I don't think LSU will be done adding bodies to the inside of this defensive line, but Gio Paez, again, at 6'3", up to 310 pounds, certainly a body that you want on that LSU defensive line. I want to get into a little bit of what he brings to the table for this LSU program. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the LSU fans. It has been a blast talking this program on the recruiting trail, in the transfer portal. We got our LSU commitment sweatshirt on right now. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Gio and talk about what he brings to this LSU defense. But I first want to start off with, this is an LSU team heading into 2024 that we've said can be extremely dangerous if they figure out the defensive side of things. Obviously, bringing in Blake Baker, a whole new defensive staff, that has you optimistic about it. But you look at this LSU team, Garrett Nussmeier, very good quarterback, surrounded by a ton of talent at the wide receiver position, arguably the best offensive line in my mind heading into the 2024 season. A lot of the questions were on the defensive side of the football. And one of the biggest questions we had was the bodies on the inside of that defensive line. Gio Paez is a guy that I think certainly answers some of those questions, especially from a depth standpoint. Now, is a guy like Gio Paez going to come in and be a game wrecker for LSU in 2024? Probably not. But one thing you can count on is being a guy that is going to win at the point of attack, eat up double teams, and let the guys behind him really go and make plays. You need kind of guys like this on a very good defense. You look at some of the best defenses across the country, they have these kind of bodies that are not necessarily stuffing the stat sheet in terms of sacks and tackles for loss, but they're allowing guys behind them and players around them to go stuff the stat sheet. You talk about guys like Greg Penn, Harold Perkins playing that linebacker position. The more you can keep them clean, the more your interior defensive linemen can eat up double teams and allow your linebackers to play free, to play in space. That is massive for this LSU team, and a guy like Gio certainly going to help in that department. You take a look at what he did for Wisconsin last year, looking at some of the numbers, this is kind of your prototypical nose tackle, right? He's 6'3", 310 pounds, plays with low pads, wins at the point of attack. 12 run stops for Wisconsin in 2023, an average depth of tackle of 1.6 yards down the field. And that's a number that I always look at for interior defensive linemen in terms of, hey, where are you making your plays? Are you making your plays at or behind the line of scrimmage, or are you getting moved off the football? A guy like Gio, he doesn't lose at the line of scrimmage. He is going to eat double teams, win at the point of attack. And again, not a guy that is going to be a penetrator, a game wrecker in opponents' backfields, but a guy that's probably going to allow Harold Perkins to be more of that game wrecker for this LSU defense. Massive addition, not only from a talent standpoint, but more importantly from a depth standpoint. A guy that certainly is going to be in the rotation for this LSU defensive line. And you go to the LSU depth chart, and this is kind of what I want to talk about is you look at this LSU defense. We'll start in the back end. They got numbers, right? There are a lot of players, a lot of young players that you kind of feel are going to take some strides heading into 2024. I think the linebacker room is really good with guys like Greg Penn, Whit Weeks, obviously Harold Perkins making that transition back to that off-ball spot. I think a lot of the question was the numbers on the inside of that defensive line were probably the biggest question that you had, right? And you add a guy like Sean Washington and Gio Paez, two guys that are going to be very solid rotational pieces on that defensive line. You bring in a true freshman in Dominic McKinley in the summer. It's starting to take form. Now, do I think Brian Kelly will probably go to the transfer portal and add one more of these kind of bodies? I certainly do. That being said, you're starting to get a nice rotation. And in my mind, that is so vitally important. You look at some of the best defenses that we've seen across the country over the last couple of years, Michigan last year, the Georgia Bulldogs the last couple of years. Not only did they have very good players on the defensive line, they had a lot of depth. They had the ability to rotate 4, 5, 6 big bodies a game, kind of keeping those guys fresh throughout the duration of not only 4 quarters, but 15 games in a season. LSU probably wasn't at that point, probably still isn't at that point, but a guy like Gio Paez certainly kind of adds to that rotation. Now, we'll see what LSU does the rest of the way as that transfer portal opens back up after spring practice, but this was probably one of the best interior defensive linemen available in the transfer portal. A really nice get for the LSU Tigers to continue to build that rotation. We'll end it at that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.